Okay, today we're going to talk about energy and specifically the energy that exists on a spectrum between love and harm. Okay, so if you think about these two polar opposites, you have unconditional love on the one end, right? And that's a generative, loving, supportive kind of energy. And you can start to think about this in the context of human relationships, right? Versus on the other end, harm, abuse. And this is the energy that seeks to, um, destroy, erode, tear down, that kind of energy, right? So I just want to make it really simple that there's these two polar opposites, and then it exists also on a spectrum because I just was having a session with someone earlier, and I see this a lot where people don't think necessarily that they have trauma, or they don't like the word abuse. And I totally get it. I really understand all of that. And I'm not here to try to make everyone feel traumatized. I'm not here to make people to use these words that are charged in like a provocative way. I'm not actually at all. But what I do want to just convey is that there's just a truth to it, right? Of this spectrum. And so people who maybe are more on like the love and light side of things, where they only see the good, a lot of times they're not able to, for many reasons, right? Like usually protective reasons, they're not able to actually just face the reality that sometimes people don't have good intentions and they do cause harm. These are the people that are sort of in denial when they're in relationships that are not for their highest good, right? And um, I do use the word abuse sometimes, and I also frame it in terms of it being on a spectrum. And it totally can, right? From very severe, dark, dark things that are happening, all the way to um, just, unkind language, judgmental behaviors, right? Shaming. So hopefully you get an understanding that these things can happen. It is to varying degrees, but it's also what I'm trying to do here is to help you understand that there's actually just two different kinds of energy. It's either loving and supportive, or it's harmful. So just that alone really can help some people because a lot of the people that come to me, um, and I want to talk about the energy behind all of this too, as well. A lot of the people that come to me have gotten themselves into relationships where they don't get treated very well by other people, not just their romantic partner, although sometimes that's where it's most concentrated and they can see that there's a problem. So that's when they come to me for help. But I get people who are running a lot of the same patterns I did when I was younger. And so when we trace a lot of this back to childhood, we can see that usually in the parental template, right, of the mother and the father relationship and how that influenced them, there usually was that initial coding and programming to kind of, this is where I'll get into the energy, install these programs internally. So this is where I'll get into the energy aspect of it, because the love energy and then the harm energy, these are running behind the scenes. And so I'll just give you an example. So I was just working with someone earlier today who was talking about the relationship with one of her parents had a lot of judgment, and there was a lot of shaming, right? And judgment and that kind of energy directed at her. A lot of these situations are nuanced. These are just parts of the parents, right? It's not the totality of who these people are. A lot of times these are parts that are, abusive parts, dysfunctional parts that then cause harm and damage other people, right? And this is part of it. This is easier for some people to digest, um, because denial is a real thing. And so it's easier for us to actually digest on the one hand, right? That this is actually a dysfunctional part, usually that was caused from their own childhood wounding. Um, and it's good to have empathy. I'm just, as I'm speaking, I'm thinking about there's other ways that people cause harm that actually aren't from trauma. We're not going to get into that in this video. one mistake that I see people making is that they always make the assumption that the person who's abusive or harmful has trauma underneath. That's not always the case. I talked about that with Dr. George Simon on the podcast. If you missed that episode, is so good. He's such an expert in this field. But anyway, if you had a childhood where there was any sort of any of this energy coming at you, right? Shameful, in a toxic shame kind of way. Because there's a difference too between healthy shame and toxic shame. I'll make another video about that because that's a huge issue right now in our world. So if toxic shame was sort of being directed at you, judgment, um, any of the kind of punisher energy, suppression, um, you were basically conditioned, shaped, and molded into a certain way of being that was acceptable. And the love was conditional only if you acted that way, right? A lot of us can relate to all of this, right? So unfortunately, the energy behind all of that, and this can go to like more severe abuse cases, but I'm trying to also outline that it's a spectrum and it can happen in varying degrees. A lot of the people who come to me just they don't actually understand, they miss all of this, right? Because in their mind, abuse, it looks a certain way. Um, and I'll just pause for a minute and just say that this energy that we carry as humans, because we're imperfect, and that's okay, is running all over the place. And we're not perfect. And I might hurt someone's feelings and I might do this. And so it's also important to understand that it's usually running in all of us to varying degrees. Um, and the energy also can go two ways. This is what I was just talking about on social media. The energy can go one of two ways usually when this sort of happens in childhood, where we get this that's coming towards us, right? So as a child, also, we don't have boundaries yet because we just don't, right? Children just, they don't have boundaries, and that's exactly fine, right? For childhood, we're not meant to right from the start. But when this energy and these behaviors are getting directed at us, where we're receiving that kind of programming, that conditioning from our parents that we're not good enough, we're doing something bad, we're bad. The energy comes in and it becomes part of our system. So you hear people say that we store stuff in our tissues, in our body, and that's true. I mostly work on an energetic level too, because it gets into the energetic field, right? And so I also believe that the subconscious actually lives in the energetic field. This is what tends to pull things in or repel things. And so we won't get into the energetic field today deeply, but what I'm saying is that if that energy starts to come in, it can either start to run within you as a program that then turns against yourself. This is the inner critic, the inner punisher, the perfectionistic side, where if we don't do it just right, we feel like a bad person, we feel like we've failed. All of this stuff, a lot of people just label it as the inner critic. This is an installation program from childhood, from the energy, and you could just say on a psychological level, the behaviors that we experience, usually from our mother, father. It can come from other sources too. And so the energy behind it is what we actually need to work on clearing, in addition to also working on the psychological level to heal the wounds. So when I work with people, especially if we do the longer 90-minute sessions that are a combination of therapy and breath work, we're working energetically to clear some of this stuff and also replace it with love energy towards ourselves. So self-love goes way beyond just saying some affirmations or maybe doing a little bit of therapy. It goes much, much deeper. And you have to also work on an energetic level to get this stuff out of your field so that it's not working. So a lot of the people that come to me, this energy has come in from childhood. Then it starts to work against them and it's like the inner abuser against yourself. And that's what happens. But also sometimes it can go the other way. So sometimes you can see children who maybe have been abused, then they end up being the perpetrator outside, right? And then the energy is not directed towards themselves, it's directed outwards against people. So usually it goes one of two ways. You either internalize and it sort of harms yourself, or you go out into the world and you actually become the abuser. Sometimes it can happen simultaneously in the person and also externally, but it doesn't always happen that way. I see that that's another misunderstanding that people have. They always think that the perpetrators have some kind of internal self-hatred going on. It's not always the case. This is where it gets a little bit more complicated. I won't have time in this video to explain why, but if you want to go listen to the George Simon episode, that's a good start for you to start to understand some of the personality disorders behind some of these things and where they come from. So the energy gets lodged in our system. And so we don't just work on a psychological level. That's just not a complete system of healing. I had to go through this in my own life, so this is how I know. And also working with so many people, we have to work on both sides. So whether it's sexual abuse and trauma or just abuse in general that has caused any wound. So I just want to sort of broaden this term abuse, which I know some people are not going to agree with, but it's just anything that has caused harm. And it's the energy behind it. It's not so much these like identities that we stamp on people. It's more of the energy behind it. So is it lifting you up or is it dragging you down? This is another way to describe the energy behind it. So you could call this energy love versus evil, good versus evil, right? It's the dark energy, the energy that seeks to punish, weaken, destroy. It is the darker energy. Unfortunately, a lot of the people that come to me have it internalized and it's working against them. I also just want to give a practical example of how it's working in adult relationships, especially if someone has anxious attachment or if they have disorganized attachment and there's any sort of void internally, right, of that self-love, like they have a deficit. There's a hole internally. That's from this energy that has come in and it's eroded and it's really working internally to create that actual hole. I mean, some people really do, they frame it in terms of these are big holes in people's energetic fields. Like they actually use that language. So it's a hole, it's a deficit, it's a void internally that energy came in. It started to erode that. And that person is truly walking around with a void. And so this is why for people that have anxious attachment or that have disorganized attachment, they're seeking a lot of times desperately outside of themselves to fill that hole. And so we need to really work with it, not just on a psychological level to help that person come back to themselves to really fill that hole with love, but also on an energetic level to get that energy out of their field that is the anti-love energy. Sometimes I call this self-hatred programming. Sometimes I call it anti-God or anti-life energy or programming. It's all the same thing that I'm talking about. And so we do need to start to understand some of these things happening beyond a psychological level. And we need to also work with the energetic component. And so I just wanted to give you an example about how this is all working in human relationships. And so, as well, if you really zoom out, and if you've ever heard me talk about things like the war on love, sex, and relationships, the dark energy is what's happening. It's working behind the scenes to erode healthy relationships between men and women. It's creating so much, right? If you've read my article on Substack, I kind of talk about how like this is a widespread agenda and campaign, but anything that's running on the side of men or women, right, where there's hatred energy on either side or there's unhealed wounds, a lot of times on the side of men collectively. There's mother wounds that need to be healed. On the side of women collectively, there's a lot of father wounds that need to be healed. And those are really interfering with healthy male-female relationships. Of course, both sides also have mother wounds and father wounds as well for women and men collectively. But when it comes to romantic relationships, usually what's going on is a lot of the wounding of the opposite sex parent. And so what is the wounding, right? The wounding is the darker energy of abuse, of harm that's creating the wounds in the first place. You don't necessarily have to call the person an abuser, but the energy behind it is what's harmful, right? And has created wounds. And so I just like to sort of use this language and really tell people what is going on, because then we can start to have solutions and frame it in a way such that, okay, so now we know actually how to work with this, right? My teacher, David Elliott, has incredible energy clearing meditations that I've shared with hundreds and hundreds of people at this point. Every time I talk about energy clearing and why we have to do it, people just have incredible experiences. And this particular energy clearing has completely changed my whole life. I've spoken about it multiple times before, especially if you listen to part one of my story. It really guides you through the dramatic impact that that had in my life. Um, and so I really credit him to helping to fill in some of the gaps for me in terms of my understanding, and also the encouragement to start to think a little bit beyond traditional psychology training in terms of the energy behind it. And so let me just think if there's anything else I want to share. Of course, if there's any questions, please reach out. Um, yeah, let's see, in the breathwork resources section in our community, I do have links to all of these things. And I also, one-on-one with clients, when I work deeply with people, we also work on the clearing because David's trained me to do it as well with people. And I also have other um, exercises I've picked up along the way from, for example, Jill Schaefer taught me something called recapitulation. It's also similarly working with energy. And I also just have my own energetic tools that I use as well with clients to overcome this and have it be a more holistic approach to healing. So yeah, my main point in this video is just to really talk about the energy, the darker energy underneath some of this, and why we need to actually take an energetic approach as well as a psychological approach. Okay, talk to you soon.